I gave a homeless boy $20 and in return he handed me a note. Your daughter-in-law put something in your coffee, don't drink it. I was shocked but decided to trust him. When I asked her what she put in my coffee, she did something unbelievable. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The ritual was the anchor of my days. At 68, a life once defined by the chaotic symphony of a busy social work office in downtown Philadelphia had settled into a quiet, predictable rhythm. The loudest sound in my row house in Mount Airy was usually the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock my late husband Robert had cherished. My days were a soft tapestry of gardening, reading, and the cherished, unwavering ritual of my daughter-in-law's afternoon visit. Serena was, by all accounts, the perfect daughter-in-law. Impeccably dressed, professionally successful, and relentlessly attentive. She would arrive every day at precisely 3 p.m., her sleek electric car whispering to a stop at the curb. In her hands she would carry a silver thermos, a vessel that had become a symbol of her devotion. "I brought your coffee, Martha," she would chirp, her voice a bright melodious sound that filled the quiet rooms of my house. "It's that special blend from the roaster in Old City, with a touch of cinnamon, just how you like it." She would pour the steaming, fragrant liquid into my favorite ceramic mug, the one with the slightly chipped rim that Robert had given me on our 20th anniversary. She'd place it in my hands, her own fingers cool and manicured, and pat my shoulder with a tenderness that felt almost rehearsed. My son David, a good man with a heart full of love and a mind full of his wife's opinions, saw these daily visits as proof of Serena's saintliness. "You see, Mom?" he'd say during our weekly phone calls. "I told you she was one of the good ones. She worries about you. She wants to make sure you're taken care of." I knew he was right. Of course, I was lucky. Many of my friends complained about daughters-in-law who were distant or dismissive. Mine brought me artisanal coffee every single day. She managed my doctor's appointments, sorted my medications into little plastic boxes, and spoke to me with a patient, gentle tone one might use for a beloved, slightly fragile antique. But lately, underneath the gratitude, a strange, unwelcome feeling had begun to fester. A quiet wrongness. It was a sense of being managed, handled. My own competence, the very quality that had defined my 40-year career, was being gently and lovingly eroded. If I forgot a name or misplaced my reading glasses, Serena would exchange a knowing, sorrowful look with David. "It's okay, Martha," she'd say softly. "We all have our senior moments." And I had been having more of them. A strange fogginess had started to cloud my afternoons. A lethargy that made it difficult to concentrate on my book or even follow the plot of a television show. David and Serena attributed it to my age, to the natural, inevitable decline. They'd started talking about my future, about whether the two-story house was becoming too much for me. Their concern was a soft, suffocating blanket, and the daily coffee ritual was the thread that held it all together. It was an act of love. It had to be. The day my world tilted on its axis started like any other. I had a routine checkup with my cardiologist downtown, a relic of a minor heart scare from a few years back. Serena had, of course, arranged the car service. As I stepped out of the black sedan onto the bustling sidewalk near Jefferson Hospital, the city hit me with its familiar chaotic energy. The air was thick with the smell of street food and exhaust fumes. People rushed past, their faces buried in their phones, their minds on their destinations. My appointment was quick and uneventful. My heart was as strong as ever. As I was leaving, I decided to walk a few blocks, to feel the city's pulse in a way I hadn't in a while. It was on a corner, huddled in the doorway of a closed-down bookstore, that I saw him. He was young, no older than 19 or 20, with intelligent eyes that seemed to absorb everything, a silent observer of the river of humanity that flowed past him, pretending he didn't exist. He wasn't holding a sign or asking for money. He was just sitting, a study in forced invisibility. My career as a social worker had taught me to see the people everyone else looks through. I had spent a lifetime in the trenches of this city's pain, navigating the labyrinth of poverty, addiction, and mental illness. I knew the look in that boy's eyes. It wasn't the vacant look of someone lost to drugs. It was the sharp, wary look of a survivor. I stopped. The river of pedestrians parted around me, annoyed by the disruption to their flow. "Excuse me," I said, my voice soft. The boy's eyes flickered up, surprised to be addressed. "It's a cold day," I said. "Have you had anything hot to eat?" He shook his head, A barely perceptible motion. He seemed to be bracing himself for a lecture, for the inevitable get a job that so often followed a stranger's attention. I didn't offer a lecture. I opened my purse and took out a crisp $20 bill. Go get yourself a hot meal, I said, holding it out to him. There's a good diner a couple of blocks from here. Get the soup. It'll warm you up. He stared at the money, then at my face, his expression shifting from suspicion to a raw, unguarded bewilderment. He reached out a grimy hand and took the bill, his fingers brushing against mine. Thank you, he whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. What's your name? I asked. Jamal, he said. Stay warm, Jamal, I said, giving him a small smile. I turned to walk away, feeling the familiar mix of sadness for his situation and a quiet satisfaction for having made a small human connection. I hadn't solved his problems, but I had seen him. Sometimes that's all you can do. I had only taken a few steps when I heard a frantic shuffling sound behind me. Ma'am, wait. I turned. It was Jamal. He was on his feet now, his eyes wide with a desperate, terrifying urgency. He rushed toward me, and for a fleeting second a flicker of city dwellers' fear went through me. But his face held no malice, only panic. He glanced nervously over his shoulder, as if he were being watched. I saw you, he said, his words coming out in a rush. At the cafe, the one with the tables outside. Your daughter? The fancy lady in the nice coat. I see her there sometimes. I frowned, confused. My daughter-in-law, yes. Serena. She likes the coffee there. Jamal's eyes darted around the crowded street. He fumbled in the pocket of his torn jacket and pulled out a crumpled, greasy napkin. He pressed it into my hand, his own hand trembling. Please, he whispered, his voice so low I could barely hear it over the traffic. Don't let her see you with this. Just read it, please. You have to believe me. Before I could ask what he was talking about, he turned and darted back into the anonymity of the crowd, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, the warm, grimy napkin clutched in my hand. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. What on earth had just happened? I walked another block, my mind reeling, before I ducked into the quiet lobby of an office building. My hands shook as I unfolded the napkin. The words were scribbled in a frantic, messy hand, written with a pen that was running out of ink, but the message was clear. It was a message that defied all logic. A message that belonged in a cheap thriller, not in my quiet, well-ordered life. Your daughter-in-law put something in your coffee. Don't drink it. The world seemed to tilt and spin. The words on the greasy napkin were an absurdity, a cruel, nonsensical joke. Serena? My Serena? The woman who fussed over my health, who reminded me to take my vitamins, who treated me with such suffocating, relentless care. The idea was preposterous. It was the paranoid delusion of a troubled young man on the street. It had to be. My logical mind, the part of me that had once managed caseloads and balanced budgets, fought for control. I should throw the napkin away. I should forget this ever happened. It was a bizarre, meaningless encounter, but my other mind, the mind of a social worker who had spent 40 years looking into the eyes of frightened people, couldn't let it go. I thought of Jamal's face. The raw, genuine terror in his eyes. It was a look I had seen 100 times before. It was the look of a child about to testify against an abusive parent. It was the look of a witness terrified of retaliation. It was the look of someone telling a dangerous, unbelievable truth. Liars, in my experience, were often blustery and defensive. The truly terrified were quiet, their words a desperate whisper. My mind raced, replaying the last few months. The fogginess, the lethargy, the senior moments that seemed to be getting more frequent. I had accepted my own decline so easily. I had let them convince me that I was fading, that my mind was slowly betraying me. What if it wasn't my mind? What if it was the coffee? A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, settled in my chest. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, forced to make a choice. I could trust Serena, the perfect, loving daughter-in-law, and dismiss this as a madman's raving, or I could trust the terrified eyes of a homeless boy and accept that my entire world was a carefully constructed lie. I walked out of the building and into the cold afternoon air. My car service was waiting at the curb. As I sank into the leather seat, I folded the napkin carefully and tucked it deep into my purse. I had made my decision. It was a terrifying leap of faith into a chasm of uncertainty, but I had to know. I would trust the warning. The drive home to Mount Airy was a blur. The familiar streets of my neighborhood, usually a source of comfort, seemed alien and menacing. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every smiling face seemed to wear a mask. By the time I walked through my front door, my heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I had less than an hour until 3 p.m. Less than an hour until the ritual began. I walked into my kitchen, my movements stiff and automatic. I felt like an actor preparing for the most difficult role of her life. The role of the unsuspecting, slightly dotty old woman. My stage was my own home. My audience was the woman who was either my loving caregiver or a monster of unimaginable cruelty. At precisely 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I took a deep, shaky breath and pasted a warm, welcoming smile on my face. "It's open, dear," I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally high. Serena swept in, a vision of casual elegance in a cashmere coat and leather boots. She was smiling, her perfect white teeth gleaming. "I brought your coffee, Martha," she chirped, holding up the familiar silver thermos. "It's a bit chilly out there today. I thought you could use something to warm you up." "You are a lifesaver, Serena," I said, my words feeling like ash in my mouth. I was just starting to feel a bit sluggish. She followed me into the kitchen, her expensive perfume filling the air. As she turned to take off her coat and hang it on the back of a chair, my moment came. With my back to her, my hands trembling so violently I was afraid I would drop the mug. I poured the entire contents of my cup, the coffee she had just poured for me, down the sink. The dark, fragrant liquid vanished down the drain with a quiet gurgle. It felt like I was disposing of a poison. I quickly turned on the tap, washing away any lingering traces. I refilled my mug with the lukewarm instant coffee I had made earlier, and hidden behind the fruit bowl. By the time Serena turned back around, I was holding my mug, a placid smile on my face. The entire operation had taken less than 10 seconds. It was the longest 10 seconds of my life. "There we go," she said, her smile never faltering. "You just relax, Martha. You look a little tired today. Let me tell you about the new charity gala I'm organizing." For the next hour, I sat and listened. I nodded and smiled. I sipped the bitter, lukewarm instant coffee, pretending it was the delicious cinnamon-laced brew she believed I was drinking. Every word she spoke, every casual observation, every expression of concern, was now filtered through a lens of profound suspicion. Her kindness felt like a weapon. Her attentiveness felt like surveillance. I watched her. I really watched her. I noticed the way her eyes would occasionally flicker to my mug, a quick, almost imperceptible glance to see if I was drinking. I noticed the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I was no longer a passive recipient of her care. I was a social worker again, observing a client, looking for the cracks in the carefully constructed facade, and for the first time I could see them. They were tiny, but they were there. When she finally stood up to leave, I felt a wave of relief so powerful my knees felt weak. "You finish up your coffee, Martha," she said, patting my shoulder. "It'll do you good. I'll see you tomorrow." "Thank you, dear," I said, my voice a weak whisper. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The lie tasted like poison. The moment the front door clicked shut, my performance ended. I slumped in my chair, my body shaking with a mixture of terror and adrenaline. The mug rattled in my trembling hands. I had survived the first test, but this was just the beginning. I needed more than a scribbled warning on a napkin. I needed proof. I walked over to the thermos she had left on the counter. As she always did, my first instinct was to wash it, to scrub away every trace of her and her potential betrayal. But my logical mind, the part of me that was now fully awake and fighting back, took over. I couldn't destroy the evidence. I had to preserve it. I carefully unscrewed the lid. I poured the remaining coffee down the drain, watching the dark liquid swirl away. Then I held the thermos upside down, letting the last few drops collect in the lid. I noticed it then, a faint, almost invisible residue clinging to the bottom of the stainless steel interior. It was a pale, chalky substance that didn't look like it belonged in coffee. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was real. This was happening. I rummaged through my cabinets, my hands still shaking. I found a small, clean glass jar, the kind I used for making jam. With the steady hand of a scientist, I rinsed the thermos with a tiny amount of distilled water, just enough to collect the residue. I swirled the water around, making sure it picked up every last particle, and then poured the cloudy liquid into the jam jar. I screwed the lid on tight, my movements precise and deliberate. I labeled the jar with a piece of masking tape. Coffee sample. Serena Hayes. The act of writing her name, of formally identifying her as the source of this potential poison, was a chilling, definitive step. There was no going back now. I was no longer a mother-in-law. I was an investigator, and my daughter-in-law was my only suspect. The jar of cloudy liquid sat on my kitchen counter, a terrifying monument to my new reality. It was a tangible piece of the nightmare. Now I had to find out what it contained. My mind immediately went to Anya Sharma. Dr. Anya Sharma. We had worked together for nearly 20 years. She was a brilliant, no-nonsense toxicologist who often consulted on my most difficult child welfare cases, helping us identify everything from lead poisoning to deliberate harm. She had retired a few years before I did, but we'd remained close friends, meeting for lunch every few months. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over her name. What would I say? Anya, can you test my coffee? I think my daughter-in-law might be trying to poison me. It sounded like the ravings of a lunatic. She would think I had finally lost my mind. But what was the alternative? To do nothing. To live in fear, pretending to drink the coffee every day. Waiting for what? For the fogginess to consume me completely. For my son to be convinced I needed to be put in a home, with Serena graciously managing my assets. The thought was a splash of ice water in my face. I had to know. I dialed her number. Martha. What a nice surprise. Anya's warm, familiar voice answered. Anya, I need your help, I said, my own voice tight and strained. I have a favor to ask. A strange one. And I need you to promise me you'll keep it between us. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Anya's tone shifted from friendly to professional. Of course, Martha. What's going on? I have a sample, a liquid. I need to know what's in it, I said, the words feeling inadequate and insane. I can't explain everything right now, but it's important. Life or death important. Anya didn't question me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She trusted me. 20 years of working in the trenches together had forged a bond that transcended polite questions. Bring it to my house, she said simply. I still have access to the lab for my consulting work. I'll run it myself, no questions asked. The next day was a blur of anxiety. I met Anya, handed over the small sealed jar and tried to ignore the look of deep concern in her eyes. Then I went home and waited. Every tick of the grandfather clock felt like a hammer blow. Every ring of the phone made me jump. I couldn't eat. I couldn't read. I could only pace the length of my living room, a prisoner in my own home, waiting for a verdict that would either confirm my sanity or condemn me to a living nightmare. The call came just after dusk. The sky outside was a bruised purple. Martha, Anya's voice was grim. All traces of warmth were gone. Are you sitting down? I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Yes. The sample you gave me. It contained a significant concentration of a drug called xylapram. It's a powerful sedative, usually prescribed for severe short-term insomnia. But the dosage, it's been manipulated, and it was mixed with a binding agent that makes it dissolve almost completely in hot liquid. As sedative, I whispered, my throat dry. It's more than that, Martha, Anya said, her voice low and serious. At this sustained daily dosage, xylapram has a very specific, very nasty side effect. It doesn't just make you tired. It induces a state of profound cognitive disruption, confusion, short-term memory loss, lethargy, paranoia. She paused, letting the words sink in. Martha, a person taking this every day would present with all the classic textbook symptoms of a rapid aggressive onset of dementia. The room went silent. The only sound was the frantic beating of my own heart. It wasn't old age. It wasn't my mind failing. It was Serena. She wasn't trying to kill me. She was trying to erase me. She was methodically, scientifically, and lovingly turning me into a feeble-minded old woman who couldn't be trusted to manage her own life. She was building a cage of symptoms around me, and my son, my loving, trusting son, was helping her lock the door. The sheer diabolical evil of it took my breath away. It was a perfect, untraceable crime, with my own body as the evidence. The rage when it came was a cleansing fire. It burned away the fear, the doubt, the grief. It left behind a cold, hard clarity. This was no longer a suspicion. This was a war. And I, Martha Hayes, was not going to be a casualty. I was going to be the general. My mind, the sharp, strategic mind that had been clouded for months, was suddenly crystal clear. A simple accusation was useless. I had no doubt that Serena had a contingency plan for that. She would twist it, turn it back on me, use it as further proof of my paranoia. I couldn't just confront her. I had to expose her. I had to dismantle her perfect caring facade in a way that was undeniable, especially to my son. My plan began to take shape, each piece clicking into place with a cold, satisfying precision. I would need more than a lab result. I would need witnesses. I would need Serena's own words. That evening, I called my son. My voice was a carefully crafted instrument of frail, loving concern. David, honey, I said, letting a slight tremor enter my voice. I've been doing a lot of thinking, about my health, about the future. I think it's time we all sat down and had a serious talk. Can you and Serena come for dinner tomorrow night? There are some decisions I need to make, and I need you both here. The bait was set. The concerned, doting son and his perfect, caring wife would walk straight into my home, expecting a conversation about moving me into an assisted living facility. They were expecting a surrender. They had no idea they were walking into an ambush. The day of the dinner was one of the longest of my life. I moved through the hours with a strange, out-of-body calm. I was an actor preparing for a command performance. I went to the grocery store. I bought the ingredients for David's favorite meal: pot roast, mashed potatoes and green beans. A meal of love and tradition, a meal that would serve as the backdrop for the most brutal betrayal imaginable. As I cooked, my mind was a whirlwind of strategy. I had to control the narrative. I had to anticipate her every move. I knew Serena. She was a master of public relations, a professional spinner of stories. She would have a plausible, heartfelt explanation for everything. A simple accusation would be a pebble against her fortress wall. I needed a battering ram. They arrived at 7 o'clock right on time. Serena was carrying a bouquet of lilies, and David had a bottle of my favorite red wine. They were the picture of a perfect, loving family, coming to support their aging mother through a difficult decision. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. "Mom, this smells amazing," David said, kissing my cheek. "Martha, you shouldn't have gone to all this trouble," Serena said, arranging the lilies in a vase with a practiced, elegant hand. "You should be resting." The dinner was a surreal performance. We talked about the weather, about David's latest architectural project, about the charity gala Serena was planning. The conversation was a placid lake, but underneath, I could feel the powerful, dangerous currents of what was to come. I ate little, my stomach a tight knot of anxiety. I watched them, my son so full of love and blind trust, and his wife a monster wearing the face of an angel. After the plates were cleared, the moment came, as was her ritual. Even during a dinner visit, Serena went to the kitchen to prepare the coffee. "Let me get that for you, Martha," she said, her voice full of practiced care. "You just sit tight." I let her. I watched her from the dining room, my heart a trip hammer against my ribs. I saw her open the cabinet, take down my favorite mug. I saw her turn her back for a moment, her shoulders hiding her hands from my view. I knew what she was doing. She was administering the evening's dose. She returned with the steaming mug, the familiar aroma of cinnamon filling the air. She placed it on the table in front of me, a gentle smile on her face. "There you go, drink this. It'll help you relax." David smiled at her, a look of pure adoration on his face. "You're so good to her, honey." I let the mug sit there, its steam curling into the air like a phantom. I folded my hands on the table. My heart was pounding, but my voice when I spoke was steady. "Serena," I said, my tone quiet and conversational. I looked her directly in the eye. "There's something I need to ask you, and I need you to be honest with me." David frowned, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Serena's smile remained perfectly in place, but her eyes, I noticed, grew still and watchful. "Of course, Martha. Anything." I took a deep breath. "What did you put in my coffee?" The silence that followed was absolute. David stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, a look of shocked disbelief on his face. But Serena did not deny it. She did not act confused. She did something so brilliant, so audacious, so utterly unbelievable that for a moment, I almost admired her sociopathic genius. Her face, her perfectly composed, beautiful face, crumpled. It was a masterful performance. Her lower lip began to tremble. Her eyes filled with tears. She didn't look at me. She turned to David, her entire body seeming to shrink with a theatrical, heartbreaking grief. She grabbed his arm, her manicured fingers digging into his sleeve. "Oh, David," she sobbed, her voice a choked, broken whisper. She's getting worse. It's happening. This is what the doctor warned us about. Her paranoia, it's taking over. It was a checkmate. A move so unexpected and so devastatingly effective that it left me breathless. She wasn't denying the accusation. She was confirming it, twisting it into a symptom of the very disease she had been inducing. She had weaponized my own mind against me. David, my poor manipulated son, reacted exactly as she knew he would. His shock at my question instantly morphed into a protective, angry concern for his weeping wife. He turned on me, his face a mask of disappointment and frustration. "Mom, what is wrong with you?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Stop this. You're scaring Serena. Dr. Evans told us this might happen. He said you might start having delusions, that you might become suspicious of the people closest to you. Why would you accuse the one person in the world who takes care of you every single day?" Dr. Evans. The name was unfamiliar to me. A cold dread washed over me as I realized the full terrifying scope of Serena's plan. This wasn't just about drugging my coffee. She had been building a case against me for months. A false, fraudulent medical history. Serena, still sobbing, added another layer to her masterpiece of deceit. I didn't want to tell you, Martha," she stammered, looking at me with eyes full of fake pity. "David and I have been so worried. I've been taking you to see him for months. For your memory, you don't remember, do you?" Of course I didn't remember, because it had never happened. She had invented a doctor, invented appointments, invented a diagnosis. She had constructed an entire false reality, and my son was its primary citizen. I was an outcast in my own life. My sanity put to a vote where I was outnumbered 2-1. David stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "That's it," he said, his voice firm with a misguided sense of purpose. "We're calling Dr. Evans right now. You need help, Mom. We need to get you proper care. Before you hurt someone, before you hurt yourself." He was looking at me, but he was seeing a crazy old woman. A stranger. Serena had finally succeeded. She hadn't just erased my mind. She had erased my credibility, my history, my very identity as a sane and capable woman in the eyes of my only child. I was utterly and completely alone. A strange, cold calm settled over me. The fear was gone, replaced by a clarity so profound it felt like a religious experience. I had been outmaneuvered. I had walked into a trap of my own making, but the game wasn't over yet. Serena, in her brilliant, evil confidence, had made one critical, fatal mistake. She had underestimated me. "You are very, very good, Serena," I said, my voice as cold and clear as ice. "A truly masterful performance. But you made a mistake." She looked at me through her crocodile tears, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. David just looked angry. "Mom, stop it. You prepared my coffee in public," I continued, my gaze locked on Serena's. "You thought no one was watching, but someone is always watching in a city like this." I stood up from the table, walked to my front door and opened it. Standing on my porch, clean, composed, and wearing a new coat and shoes I had bought for him that morning, was Jamal. He looked nervous, but his eyes were steady. David stared at him, completely bewildered. Who is this?" "This is my witness," I said. Jamal stepped into the room. He did not look at David or Serena. He looked directly at me. I gave him a small, encouraging nod. He had been terrified to come, terrified of the beautiful, powerful woman from the cafe, but he had come anyway. His loyalty, bought with a simple act of kindness, was more real than anything in that room. I don't know what's going on here," David stammered, looking from Jamal to me. Serena, however, knew exactly what was happening. Her sobs had stopped abruptly. Her face had gone pale. The mask of the grieving caregiver was beginning to crack. "Jamal," I said, my voice gentle, "will you please tell my son what you told me?" Jamal took a deep breath. His voice when he spoke was quiet, but clear. "I'm on the street, near the Rittenhouse Cafe, most days," he began. "I see things. I saw her." He nodded his head towards Serena, without looking at her. "Most afternoons she sits at one of the outside tables with that silver thermos. She buys a coffee, but she doesn't drink it. She waits until no one is looking, and she takes a little bottle out of her purse. She crushes up pills, little white pills, and stirs the powder into the thermos. I've seen her do it, more than once." The room was silent. David stared at Jamal, his mind clearly struggling to process this impossible story. Serena found her voice. It was no longer the soft, gentle coo of a caregiver. It was sharp, cold, and dripping with venom. "This is insane," she spat, dropping the grieving act completely. "Who is this? A homeless drug addict? You brought a filthy vagrant into your house to tell lies about me? David, can you believe this? Your mother is so far gone, she's paying street trash to back up her delusions." She had played her next card, discredit the witness. It was a good move. A predictable one, and I was ready for it. "You're right, David," I said, turning to my son whose face was a canvas of confusion and pain. "It's my word against your perfect wife's. It's a homeless boy's word against a successful PR executive. Who are you going to believe?" I let the question hang in the air, a terrible, impossible choice for a son to make. I could see the war in his eyes. He wanted to believe his wife. His entire world was built on the foundation of her perfection. But Jamal's story, told with such simple, unadorned sincerity, had clearly shaken him. "So," I said, my voice still dangerously calm, "I brought a third witness." I reached into the pocket of my apron and pulled out a small, sleek digital recorder. I placed it on the dining room table. It was a tiny object, but it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Serena's eyes locked onto it. And for the first time I saw a flicker of genuine raw fear. "After I got the lab results back," I said, watching her face, "I decided that I needed to be more careful. I started recording Serena's daily visits. For my own protection." I pressed the play button. Serena's bright, cheerful voice filled the silent room. It was a recording from 2 days ago. "Here's your coffee, Martha. Make sure you drink this all up, now. It has that special medicine in it to help with your forgetfulness." I pressed stop. David was staring at the recorder as if it were a snake. His face had gone ashen. "Special medicine?" he whispered, looking at his wife. Serena opened her mouth to speak, to spin another lie, but I didn't give her the chance. "And then there's this," I said, and pressed play again. This was the recording I had made that very morning. A phone call I had made to a number Serena had left on a notepad by my phone. A number labeled simply Dr. Evans. I had called, pretending to be Serena's assistant, claiming I needed to confirm Martha Hayes's next appointment. The man who answered was not a doctor. He was a struggling actor I had found through an old contact, an actor Serena had hired to play a part. But he had panicked when I mentioned the police, and for a small fee he had told me everything. Now I played the recording of Serena's last voicemail to him. "Hi Mark, it's Serena," her voice said. "All business. Just wanted to confirm our strategy for the call with the son tonight. Remember, you need to be firm about the advanced cognitive decline and the escalating paranoia. We're moving to the final phase. I need him completely on board. This is a big performance. Don't mess it up." I pressed stop. The silence that followed was a living thing. It was the silence of a world being utterly and completely destroyed. The recordings were irrefutable. They were her own words, her own voice, calmly and methodically laying out her plan to have me declared insane. David slowly turned his head and looked at his wife. He wasn't looking at the perfect, caring angel he had adored for years. He was seeing for the very first time the monster that lived behind the mask. And the mask, with nowhere left to hide, finally shattered. Serena's face, her beautiful, carefully composed face, contorted into a snarl of pure, unrestrained rage. The transformation was terrifying. The soft, caring eyes turned into hard, glittering chips of hate. "You old bitch," she shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly sound. "You were supposed to be a senile old fool. You were supposed to just fade away." She lunged, not at me but at the recorder on the table, her manicured nails like claws. David, snapping out of his shock, grabbed her arm. "Serena, stop." She whirled on him, her fury now directed at the man she had so expertly manipulated. "Don't you touch me. This is your fault. If you had just been a man and convinced her to sell the house a year ago, I wouldn't have had to do any of this." And there it was. The motive. It wasn't about my health or my well-being. It was about my house. About my money. I was an obstacle, an inconvenient breathing asset that needed to be liquidated. She continued to scream, a torrent of venom and threats, her perfect PR vocabulary replaced with the crude, ugly language of a cornered animal. She threatened to sue me, to ruin me, to tell everyone I was a crazy old woman who had framed her. But it was too late. The truth was out, a poisonous gas that had filled the room, and she was the one who was suffocating. David looked at the screaming, unrecognizable woman he had married. And then he looked at me, his eyes filled with a horror and a shame so profound it was like a physical wound. He had been her accomplice, her willing, blind accomplice. "Get out," he said, his voice a dead, hollow whisper. "Get out of my mother's house." It took another 10 minutes of screaming and threats before she was finally gone, storming out into the night, her perfect life in ruins. The front door slammed shut, and the silence that descended was heavy with the wreckage of our family. David sank into a chair, his head in his hands, and began to sob, deep, ragged, soul-shattering sobs. Jamal and I stood there, two unlikely witnesses to the complete implosion of a man's world. I walked over and placed a hand on my son's shaking shoulder. The road back for us would be long and painful, but for the first time in a very long time it would be real. 6 months later, the grandfather clock in my hallway was still ticking, a steady, comforting rhythm in a world that had been irrevocably changed. The quiet in my house was different now. It was no longer the lonely, managed silence of my recent past. It was the peaceful, earned silence of a life reclaimed. The legal fallout for Serena had been swift and brutal. Faced with the toxicology report, the recordings and the actor's full confession, she had pleaded guilty to a slew of charges, including elder abuse and aggravated assault. Her picture had been in the papers. The beautiful, charitable PR executive revealed to be a cold, calculating sociopath. She was serving a 7-year sentence in a state correctional facility. The perfect life she had been so desperate to build had become a 6 by 9 foot cell. David had filed for divorce the day after the confrontation. The process had been a painful but necessary amputation. He was a changed man. The easy, confident charm was gone, replaced by a quieter, more thoughtful humility. He was in therapy, working through the guilt and the shame of his own willful blindness. Our relationship was healing, slowly, carefully, like a broken bone being set. Our weekly phone calls were no longer about managing me, they were about understanding each other. He was finally seeing me not as an aging parent to be handled, but as the strong, capable woman I had always been. But the biggest change in my life was sitting across from me at my kitchen table. Jamal was no longer the wary, invisible boy from the bookstore doorway. He was a young man with a future. He had a spark in his eye, a confidence in his posture that hadn't been there before. After that terrible night, I couldn't just let him walk back onto the streets. He had risked everything to save me. A stranger who had shown him a small kindness. His courage deserved more than just a thank you. I discovered he was brilliant. He had a mind for numbers, and a near photographic memory, skills he had honed to survive on the streets. He had dropped out of high school when his foster family had kicked him out on his 18th birthday, but his hunger to learn was ravenous. I made a decision. The money I had carefully saved for a comfortable, quiet retirement, for cruises and garden tours and all the things David and Serena had insisted I should be doing, had a new purpose. I used a significant portion of it to set up a trust for Jamal. It wasn't a handout, it was an investment. The trust would pay for his housing, his tuition at community college, and his living expenses on the condition that he maintained his grades and met with a financial advisor, me, once a week. He was now enrolled in an accounting program, and he was at the top of his class. He lived in a small, clean apartment a few blocks away. He had a part-time job at the college library. He had a life. The depreciation formula is still giving me some trouble, he said, pushing a textbook across the table toward me. Can you walk me through it one more time? I smiled. This was our new ritual. Twice a week he would come over for dinner and we would work on his homework. He was the son I was mentoring and I was the stable, guiding presence he had never had. We had, in the strangest of ways, become family. I picked up the coffee pot from the stove, the rich, dark aroma filling my kitchen. It was my own blend, a simple, unadulterated coffee I had brewed myself. I refilled his mug, then my own. The silver thermos Serena used to bring was long gone, donated to a thrift store, its tainted legacy banished from my home. We sat there for a long time, the afternoon sun streaming through the kitchen window, the only sounds the ticking of the clock, and the quiet scratching of Jamal's pencil on his worksheet. It was a simple, peaceful scene, a woman and a young man, sharing a pot of coffee. But it was a victory. It was a testament to the fact that sometimes, the most profound connections are forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. Serena had tried to use coffee as a poison, a tool to isolate and erase me, but she had failed. In the end, that simple daily ritual had become the very thing that saved me. It had become a symbol not of betrayal but of trust, of resilience, and of the enduring power of a single, unexpected act of human kindness. I took a sip from my mug. The coffee was warm, strong, and blessedly perfectly safe.